Silence. A silence so heavy that it is not just the absence of sound. It is an overwhelming presence, a weight that presses on the chest, knots the throat, and makes the eyes burn with a diffuse anguish. I was walking down the hallway of the funeral home, dim light, my footsteps echoing softly. My impeccable black suit seemed to absorb all the shadows of the space. The wall clocks marked their seconds with a deep, slow ticking, almost like the beat of a faded heart. Working with death for more than 2 decades has taught me a lot, especially how to master silence, understand it as a language, a space where grief breathes and takes on real weight. But I never, ever imagined that silence could scream, that it could hurt, that it would hide voices, that there were sounds only I could hear that night. Have you ever been at a funeral where the silence is so thick that it screams? Where every sound, even the smallest, seems to carry the anguish of those who have passed, or worse, whispers secrets no one wants to hear. I thought the routine of my work was made of that, controlling emotions, stifling tears, managing the space between the living and the dead. But that night, I learned there is more than meets the eye. Sounds only I could hear, sounds that came from nowhere. Whispered voices, footsteps behind me, a piano that didn't play. Something pierced the soul and froze my body in silent terror. If you're listening to me now, you should know one thing. This is not a common story. It's an account of something I lived, something I felt without being able to explain. A journey to a place where silence is not peace but a threat, and I will tell you what happened that fateful night, if you have the courage to listen to the end. My breath becomes heavy just recalling it. The dark hallway seemed to stretch not only through walls but layers of time, and the clock echoed 12:13. It's funny, you can feel even before seeing that something is wrong, that the grief in that place had a voice that no one else heard. Get ready. What I'm about to tell you is not for the faint of heart, because there are things between the living and the dead that should never be heard. The funeral home where I worked since I was 26 has an atmosphere that few understand. It's an old Victorian house with dark wooden walls and stained glass windows, exuding a strange smell. A mix of wilted flowers, candle wax, and damp earth that permeates everything. The walls hold more than old photos. They hold memories, secrets, and presences that I confess cannot be interpreted with simple eyes. They have to be felt. That autumn night, the air was cold and opaque, heavy with fog that seemed to take root beneath the diffused light of the empty streets. I had prepared the body in the morning. An elderly lady, Mrs. Ellen Graves, who had been a peaceful soul in life, now resting silently on the preparation table, her serene face and hands crossed over her chest. The routine was strict and silent, exactly how it should be to show respect for the departed and maintain the dignity of farewell. But as soon as night fell and the few family members began to arrive, something began to break the normality of that house. Clocks began to speed up, their hands jumping entire minutes in seconds. Footsteps echoed through hallways too empty to contain so many presences. Doors creaked softly even though there was no wind. Small snaps, like invisible chains snapping in the dim light. The smell of burnt wax had an acrid undertone, difficult to identify. I felt a presence that did not come from the living. It was heavier, older, a cold that didn't need external temperatures to be felt, one that penetrated the bones and froze emotions. During the preparation, I started picking up on these sensations. A faint, metallic tinkling coming from the cabinet where we keep the instruments, echoes that seemed to come from the basement, shadows passing too quickly by the windows. The few relatives didn't notice. For them, it was just a sad night. For me, it was a vigil made of sensations and sounds that could not be ignored. In silence, I began mentally noting those things were not the product of my tired mind, but a communication, fragmented, subtle, almost invisible, but persistent. And that's when I understood the scope of what was in front of me. The space between the world of the living and the world of the dead is not as empty as it seems. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it screams, and those sounds, only I could hear them. Then the night went on. The sounds I was hearing began to take shape, clarity. They turned into voices, whispers, laments that gave no respite. They were not the noises of an old house, not hallucinations of a tired gravedigger. They were real, swelling inside the funeral home like an ever-growing shadow, invading the air. I felt footsteps coming discreetly behind me, slow steps that I turned to see, but in the empty hallway, there were only long shadows cast by the flickering candlelight. A muffled metallic sound dragged across the floor, as if a bracelet, a bangle, was being touched by invisible fingers. Every time I looked at the clocks, I noticed them altering time. They sped up and rewound, covering hours in an illusion that made me dizzy. Especially one clock, which stayed stuck on the number 3 longer than my patience would allow. The number 3 kept echoing for no reason, like an angry warning in the void. Slowly, my perception made me feel what I had only sensed before. Something didn't want that funeral to proceed in peace. Something needed to speak, needed someone to hear its sounds. In the chapel mirror, a shadowy form reflected, a silhouette that dodged direct gaze but seemed to watch me, like a guardian of a threshold that few have the courage to face. I found myself forced to trust my notes, hiding these experiences so I wouldn't seem crazy. Every page filled was an anchor for my sanity. While the family members pretended calm, I struggled internally, torn between the fear of the invisible and the responsibility to maintain respect for the ceremony. It was the night when silence stopped being stillness and became a scream. When dawn began to swallow the night, everything changed. The oppressive silence broke into a symphony of impossible noises. The chapel's candles flickered, their flames dancing with a life of their own, casting threatening shadows in all directions. The coffin lid, which I assumed was tightly closed, trembled and slowly opened, creaking like an old gate opening to the unexpected. I froze. The heavy body of inertia took over my limbs as I tried to rationalize, to understand if it was my mind betraying me. Then I heard a voice, a soft, sad female whisper coming from the altar. Words that came from no one present, not from that dimension. "Don't say you've forgotten me." It was as if an ancient lament materialized in the air, crossing the twilight between the real and the supernatural. The strange thing, however, was that no one else seemed to notice the voice, as if I were the only one receiving those sounds that carried worlds. Soon after, a depressive piano melody filled the room. I noticed there was no piano. The room where it was playing was empty, shrouded in shadow and echoes. My feet resisted, unable to move. I felt a cold touch, almost like a cold kiss on my shoulder. A gesture that I instinctively knew was significant, for no living hand was there. The wall clock suddenly started working again, striking 12 chimes of midnight and 13 minutes. In the distance, an animal sound, a strange bark, broke the night, strange as if coming from the very entrails of that ancient building. In the next moment, my understanding of time and space shattered. The feeling was as if I were trapped in a threshold with no way out. An invisible shadow enveloped me, relentless and at the same time ethereal. I heard my name being called, a slow call, heavy with sorrow and a cruel warning. I trembled, though I tried not to show it, knowing that the boundary between the real and the imaginary was crumbling. When I looked at the coffin display, I saw my reflection, but there was a figure behind it. A pale woman, with deep, empty eyes staring at me with brutal intensity, eyes that carried centuries of sadness and longing. I wanted to scream, but my body did not respond. The space seemed to compress, and I was trapped, not by bars, but by memories, by emotions that didn't belong to me, by griefs I couldn't share. That presence struck my soul with words I would never forget. Silence is not absence. Silence is the scream that cannot be heard. The shadow disappeared like a sigh, leaving behind a familiar scent, damp earth, bittersweet memory, and the promise of return. I was alone, and I would never be the same again. After that night, the silence that surrounds me in the funeral home changed forever. The routine continues, opening doors, preparing bodies, receiving families. But inside me, every sound, even the most imperceptible, carries a story only I heard. My colleagues ignore it, thinking my observations are the result of the weight of the work or the weariness of time. That's why I keep these experiences to myself, secrets that isolate me. But this loneliness is not mere suffering. It's vigilance. I know I am not alone. I know silence has layers, presences, voices that choose their listeners. And I ask you, if you were alone in a room full of the dead and heard sounds no one else could hear, would you have the courage to keep listening? Or would you close your eyes and run from what silence has to say? If these words reach you, comment with the word whisper. Tell me, have you ever felt that grief goes beyond tears? That silence echoes stories that cannot be ignored? Sometimes, when all we have is the night and its secrets, the answer lies in what no one would dare listen to.